The Alpha King ignored his pregnant mate until their pup was born and she had complications. The forest was quiet under the moon's silver glow, its shadows stretching like silent watchers across the snow. The wind whispered through bare branches, carrying the faint scent of frost and distant fires. In the heart of this forest stood the great stone palace of the northern Pax, a fortress crowned with towers that gleamed under the pale light. But inside, the halls were colder than the snow outside. Lyra walked slowly along the echoing corridors, her hand brushing the carved walls. Each step echoed hollowly, a reminder that the palace, though full of life and servants, was empty of the one present she craved. Her belly, now heavy with their child, pressed against her chest with each careful step. The warmth inside her, the life growing with her own heartbeat, should have brought joy, yet it felt like a chain. She carried not just her child, but the weight of silence. The Alpha King, her mate, ruled over all these lands. His name alone could bend the strongest packs to his will. To strangers, he was a figure of strength and precision, a storm cloaked in fur and steel. But to Lyra, he was a man she once loved, now a shadow who avoided her gaze as though their bond were a punishment. The prophecy had bound them together, as if the spirits themselves had chosen her for him. Yet that choice felt like a curse now, for he was distant, cold, and unyielding. Lyra paused at the balcony, staring out over the forest. Snow drifted silently down, each flake catching the moonlight like a tiny star. She thought of the night he had chosen her, under the blood-red moon, when the winds had roared and the spirits of the forest had danced among the trees. Back then his eyes had held fire and promise. She had believed in him. She had believed in them. Now his eyes avoided hers. When he passed her in the halls, he nodded politely, but never spoke beyond duty. Words, once a bridge between them, were now walls. Lyra's heart ached for a touch, a glance, a sign that the bond they shared had not faded completely. She felt the small life inside her move, tiny kicks like reminders that she was not alone. That child, his child, was the last thread connecting them, though it seemed he scarcely noticed. In the great hall, servants bustled quietly, preparing for the long winter ahead. Torches flickered, casting dancing shadows across the stone floor. The Alpha King stood at the head of the hall, draped in dark furs that matched the shadow in his eyes. He spoke to his council with calm authority, his voice steady and commanding. But even as he ruled, his gaze never lingered on her. He was there, carrying his heir, and yet he treated her as if she were already part of a memory he preferred to forget. Lyra's shoulders sagged as she left the hall, retreating to the garden beyond the palace. Winter roses still clung stubbornly to the cold earth, their petals tinged with frost. She ran her fingers over the delicate blooms, wishing for a moment that she could bloom as easily, bright and noticed, even in the cold. She closed her eyes, imagining his touch, imagining the warmth that once made her feel alive. But the palace remained silent. Days passed in the same rhythm. Lyra tended to the child growing within her, feeling each movement as both joy and sorrow. The Alpha King remained distant, appearing only for councils or hunting trips, his presence more a formality than a comfort. The court whispered, sensing the tension between them. Some pitied her, some feared the quiet anger that simmered in her chest. She did not complain, for complaints would go unheard. Silence had become her shield, her way of surviving in a palace where the heart mattered little. One evening, the wind howled louder than usual, rattling the windows and sending a shiver through the castle. Lyra had just returned from the stables where she had spent the day learning to read the signs of the forest, the language of the trees, the tracks of animals, the whispers of spirits hidden beneath the snow. It was one of the few places she felt truly alive. As she crossed the grand hall, she saw him standing near the fireplace, his back straight and rigid as ever. The flames cast a harsh light across his sharp features. He did not speak to her. He did not invite her closer. And yet, something in the way he stood, his jaw tight and fists unclenched, betrayed the faintest flicker of concern. Lyra felt it like a cold draft, acknowledgement without warmth. She swallowed her longing, her pride a fragile shield. She knew his silence was not cruelty, but a barrier he had built around himself. He had always been a man of rules and duty, bound by prophecy and expectation. Perhaps, she thought bitterly, he feared that love would make him weak. That night sleep came fitfully. Lyra dreamed of a crimson moon rising over the palace, its light painting the halls with fire. She walked through the corridors, calling his name, but he was always just out of reach. Then she felt a sudden sharp movement inside her belly, the child stirring as if sensing the fear in her heart. She awoke with a start, her hand pressed to her stomach. The moonlight spilling through her window seemed to whisper promises she could not yet trust. Morning brought no comfort. The Alpha King left at dawn for a hunt in the northern forest, and she watched him go, feeling both relief and despair. Relief that she would not have to speak to the emptiness in his eyes, despair that the emptiness existed at all. She wandered to the palace chapel, an old, forgotten place filled with statues of ancient kings and queens, their stone faces cold but knowing. Lyra knelt before them, hands pressed together, speaking softly. "Hear me, if you are still watching. Protect him. Protect our child, and if he cannot see me, at least let him feel what he has lost." A cold wind stirred in the chapel, and for a fleeting moment, Lyra imagined she felt the faint brush of his presence. But when she turned, the pews were empty, the hall silent. And still the distance between them remained. Weeks turned into months, and the pregnancy progressed. Lyra's body changed, her steps slower, her nights restless. The servants took care of her needs, but they could not fill the void left by his absence. She found herself speaking aloud to the child, whispering secrets and stories she hoped would reach him when he was older. "Your father is strong," she would say. "But sometimes even the strongest men are blind. You will teach him." One evening, as a storm gathered beyond the palace walls, Lyra felt a sudden, sharp pain. She pressed her hand to her belly, heart pounding. The wind rattled the windows, lightning flashing through the dark sky. For the first time fear gripped her. She whispered the child's name, and her voice trembled with both dread and hope. The Alpha King returned later that night, riding through the storm, his furs soaked, eyes dark with worry. He had heard of her sudden pain from the guards, yet as he entered, he said nothing at first. His presence alone was enough to stir the bond between them, the ancient, silent bond that neither distance nor anger could fully break. Lyra lay on the bed, breath shallow, staring at him. He approached slowly, the weight of authority replaced by something heavier, something more human. "Lyra!" he said, his voice low, almost breaking the walls he had built. "Are you all right?" The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of centuries. Lyra wanted to cry, to scream, to run into his arms. She wanted to accuse him of every lonely day, every ignored whisper of the heart. But she said nothing. She could only nod, letting the storm outside mirror the storm within her. That night, they did not speak more. But as he stood at the window watching the lightning dance across the mountains, Lyra felt the first warmth of hope. Perhaps the bond was not broken. Perhaps it had only been buried beneath years of pride and fear. The palace was quiet again, the storm fading to a gentle rain. And yet, something had shifted. The Alpha King's gaze lingered longer than before, the corners of his mouth softening ever so slightly. And within Lyra, a fragile flame of longing stirred, knowing that the greatest trials were yet to come. Outside, the moon rose high, pale and watchful, as if keeping a silent vigil over the palace, over Lyra, over the life that would one day unite them, or tear them apart. The palace was alive with whispers and shadows when Lyra woke. The night had been long and unbearable, filled with pain and uncertainty. She pressed her hand to her belly and felt nothing but emptiness, a hollow ache where life should have been. The storm had passed, leaving the snow outside crisp and bright, reflecting the pale light of the rising moon. But inside the halls the air was heavy, as though holding its breath for what had yet to come. Lyra tried to stand, her legs trembling, and a sharp wave of dizziness forced her back onto the bed. Servants rushed in, their faces pale with worry, carrying blankets and herbs. Their whispers, urgent and hushed, told her she was safe, but the fear inside her could not be quieted by words. The Alpha King arrived at dawn. He had ridden hard through the forests, ignoring the cold that bit at his skin, the frost that stiffened his furs. He dismounted, his boots crunching against the snow, and strode into the palace as though the walls themselves recognized him. His eyes, dark and stormy, scanned the hall, searching for her, searching for something he had never learned to express: guilt, concern, maybe even love. Lyra's gaze met his for the first time in weeks. There was no anger in his eyes, only the barest flicker of fear, a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink around them, the palace fading, the snow outside melting into nothing. All that existed was the unspoken bond between them, a thread stretched thin but unbroken. Then the servants gasped. Lyra cried out, clutching her belly as the pain returned, sharp and insistent. The Alpha King moved toward her, swift and certain, and for the first time he did not hesitate. He reached her side and lifted her carefully into his arms, carrying her toward the birthing chamber. His hands were steady, but his chest rose and fell with tension, as though each beat of his heart carried the weight of the prophecy itself. The chamber was warm, lit by torches that flickered against the cold stone walls. The midwives and healers surrounded her, their movements practiced precise, but their eyes could not hide their concern. Lyra trembled, not from the pain alone, but from the intensity of his presence. He knelt beside her, hand resting lightly on her shoulder, and for the first time, he spoke without command or formality. "Lyra," he said softly, "you are strong. Hold on. I am here." His words, though simple, struck a chord in her chest. They carried more weight than the proclamations he made to armies, more power than any decree of the throne. For the first time in months, she believed he might see her not as a duty, not as a vessel of prophecy, but as a woman whose heart had endured loneliness and fear. The pain intensified. The midwives murmured, their voices urgent, their hands moving with delicate precision. Lyra clenched her teeth, gripping the sheets, while the Alpha King held her hand firmly, his thumb stroking hers in quiet support. The bond between them pulsed stronger than ever, a tether of life and hope. Hours passed, the storm outside the palace having long since ended, leaving the forest blanketed in white. Inside, the struggle continued, each moment stretching endlessly. Then, as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, a cry cut through the chamber, sharp, clear, and alive. Lyra's tears fell freely as she felt the small body against her chest, fragile yet perfect. The child stirred, kicking against the world with the strength of life itself. The Alpha King bent closer, his eyes wide with awe and something unfamiliar, love, pure and unguarded. "It's ours," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "Our child." The room seemed to hold its breath, the torches flickering as if in celebration. The midwives worked quickly, tending to Lyra and the newborn, while the Alpha King stayed by her side, silent but attentive. His usual pride was gone, replaced by a raw, trembling humanity that made Lyra's heart ache. But the moment of joy was shadowed by fear. Lyra's strength faltered, her breath shallow and uneven. The healers exchanged worried glances. Something was wrong. Her body, exhausted by months of carrying life and by the hours of labor, was failing to respond. The Alpha King's eyes darkened, his fear now sharp and unrelenting. "Stay with me, Lyra," he urged, his voice firm yet trembling. "I will not let you leave us." She tried to nod, but her vision blurred. The bond between them, so often ignored and neglected, now pulsed with desperate intensity. She felt his presence in every heartbeat, every whispered word, every brush of his hand. The child whimpered softly, sensing the tension, as if calling on both parents to survive. The lead healer, an old woman with eyes like storm clouds, moved closer. "She is strong. she said quietly. But she will need him, truly need him. Her body is weak, and the spirits of life demand more than herbs and prayers. The Alpha King stiffened. Tell me what I must do, he said, his voice low, almost reverent. I will do it. You must surrender, the healer said, her eyes serious. Not your strength, not your power as king. Your presence alone is not enough. You must open your heart, freely, without fear or pride. Only then will she live. Only then will the bond between you three be complete. The words struck him like a blade. He had never surrendered. His life had been a constant balance of power and control, his decisions measured and exact. To surrender, to show vulnerability, was foreign, terrifying. Yet when he looked at Lyra, pale and trembling, and at the child nestled against her chest, he knew he had no choice. He knelt beside the bed, placing both hands gently on her, and whispered aloud words he had never said before. Lyra, I am here. I have been blind. I have been distant. But I see you now. I see you and our child. I will not leave you. I will not hide from you. I am yours, if you will have me. The bond flared, a pulse of warmth and light that only they could feel. Lyra's eyes, clouded with pain, softened as she met his gaze. For the first time she understood that this man, so powerful and so distant, could change, could feel, could love without restraint. The room seemed to shift. The torches flickered, shadows dancing across the walls, and outside the palace the forest seemed to hold its breath. The child stirred once more, tiny fists pressing against the world, sensing the newfound unity of its parents. Hours passed in a blur. Lyra's strength returned slowly, aided by both the healers and the Alpha King's unwavering presence. She felt the warmth of his hands, the steadiness of his heartbeat, the certainty that he would not abandon her again. Each moment was a revelation, a step toward redemption for the man who had ignored them for too long. By nightfall she rested, the child safe and warm against her chest. The Alpha King remained beside her, watching over them both, silent but vigilant. The court waited outside the chamber, aware that something had shifted in the palace, something beyond birth or death, a change in the heart of their ruler. And yet, the night held a secret. The healer, watching the Alpha King closely, frowned. The child bore a mark faint but unmistakable, a sign not seen for generations. The mark glimmered in the torchlight, a symbol of both blessing and danger, of prophecy yet to be fulfilled. The Alpha King noticed the healer's concern. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tense. The healer shook her head. "It is a rare mark," she said softly. "It speaks of power and trials beyond imagination. The child is special, but the bond you have restored will be tested. You must protect them both, not just from the world, but from the fate written in the stars." He had faced armies, rival kings, and spirits of the wild. Yet the thought of threats to his mate and child struck him deeper than any battle ever could. He felt a resolve settle in his chest. No power, no prophecy, no curse would take them from him. Lyra stirred, sensing his determination even as she rested. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. "We are together," she whispered. "We can face anything?" "Yes," he said. "Together." Outside, the wind moaned through the palace towers, carrying whispers from the forest. Somewhere, the spirits of the northern lands watched, knowing that the Alpha King's redemption had begun, but that the trials for their family had only just begun. And in the quiet of the night, as mother and child rested and the Alpha King kept his silent vigil, a shadow moved at the edge of the forest, unseen yet deliberate, as if destiny itself had sent a warning. The palace was quiet, but the shadows in the corridor seemed heavier than before. The child slept peacefully in Lyra's arms, small and warm against her chest, yet the faint mark that glimmered on its skin reminded all who saw it that this was no ordinary birth. The Alpha King remained by her side, eyes dark with determination and worry, as if the weight of prophecy pressed directly onto his shoulders. Though Lyra had regained her strength, the bond between them had deepened in ways that scared and humbled the Alpha King. For the first time, he understood that love required more than protection or presence. It demanded openness, vulnerability, and sacrifice. The healer's words echoed in his mind. You must surrender. Only then will she live, and only then will the bond be complete. But surrender was not easy. The Alpha King had spent his life mastering control, measuring every action, every decision, every glance. To let down his defenses, even for the woman he loved, felt like stepping into a storm with no armor. Yet the memory of Lyra, fragile and trembling after the birth, anchored him. He knew that if he failed now, he would lose her, not just to danger, but to despair, to the loneliness he had forced upon her. That evening, he walked to the highest tower overlooking the forest, blanketed in snow. The wind was sharp and cold, cutting through the thick furs he wore. He closed his eyes and felt the bond, faint but insistent, reaching for him from the chamber below. Lyra's heartbeat, steady but tired, called to him in ways that words never could. He drew in a deep breath and spoke aloud, though the words were meant for no one but himself.
I cannot fail her, he said softly.
I cannot fail them.
Not now, not ever. A faint shimmer of light appeared in the forest below, curling through the trees like mist. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed. The spirits of the northern lands had never appeared to him before, not so directly. He descended the tower quickly, moving with the speed and grace of a predator, until he reached the garden where Lyra often walked to feel the forest's life. The light lingered, pulsing faintly, and he understood that this was a summons, a test. The healer joined him as he stepped into the snow. They are calling you, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Not as a king, but as a mate. To save Lyra fully, you must face the spirits and show them the truth of your heart. You must surrender pride, fear, and control. Only then will the bond and the child's future be secure. The Alpha King's jaw tightened. He had faced armies, treacherous rivals, and even the wild magic of the forest itself. Yet this test, this demand of humility, was more terrifying than anything else. Yet he knew it was necessary. He turned back toward the palace, glancing at Lyra through the window. She was awake, holding their child, eyes wide with trust and concern. She believed in him, despite his failings. That was more than he deserved, and it steeled his resolve. Night fell as he entered the forest, the snow crunching underfoot. The light pulsed ahead, guiding him to a clearing where ancient stones formed a circle, older than the palace itself. The wind carried whispers, voices that were not voices, words that were not words. He stepped into the circle, and the temperature seemed to drop, the air shimmering with unseen power. You have come, a voice echoed, resonant and cold, yet not unkind. The bond has been strained. You have ignored it, left it weak, yet you have returned. What will you give to protect it? The Alpha King bowed his head, the weight of his pride heavy on his shoulders. I will give whatever is needed, he said. I will surrender my fear, my control, my pride. I will give myself fully, if that is what is required to keep my mate and child safe. The ground shivered beneath his feet, and the light in the clearing grew brighter. Shadows twisted and coalesced into shapes, spirits of ancient kings and queens, hunters and protectors of the northern forests. They regarded him silently, testing, judging, weighing the sincerity of his words. You have power, Alpha King, one voice said, echoing like distant thunder. But power alone cannot save. Love cannot be commanded. It must be chosen and nurtured. Do you understand? I understand now. I will no longer hide behind duty or prophecy. I will stand with them, as a mate, as a father, as a man who can feel and act for what he loves. A silence fell over the clearing, heavy and deep. Then a soft glow emanated from the stones, surrounding him in warmth and light. The Alpha King felt it seep into him, melting the edges of fear and pride that had hardened his heart for so long. It was painful, raw, and beautiful, Every memory of neglect, every harsh word unspoken, every moment he had turned away from Lyra pressed into him, but now it transformed into understanding and resolve. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Lyra sensed a shift. She held the child, feeling a pulse of warmth radiate through the room. The bond, once fragile, now throbbed with life. She whispered softly to the child, "He is coming back. He is learning. We will be safe." Hours passed. Snow continued to fall outside the palace walls, soft and white, yet inside time seemed suspended. Finally, the Alpha King emerged from the forest, weary but unbroken. His eyes burned with determination, and when he entered the chamber where Lyra waited, he felt the bond surge fully, a pulse of life and unity stronger than anything he had ever known. Lyra looked up and gasped. You've returned," she said, her voice trembling with relief and awe. "I am here," he said simply, kneeling beside her. "I am here, Lyra. I am yours, and I will not leave you again. Not for anything in the world." Their hands met, fingers entwining over the soft blanket that held their child. The Alpha King's touch was gentle, steady, and for the first time without pride or fear. He could feel the bond fully now, the connection that had never been broken, only hidden beneath distance and stubbornness. The healer observed silently, a faint smile crossing her face. "The bond is restored," she murmured, "but the child carries a mark. The challenges are not over. Your trials together are just beginning." The Alpha King did not flinch. He held Lyra closer, and the child stirred, sensing the renewed unity. He felt a protective fury rising inside him, not anger, but fierce determination. No power, no spirit, no fate would harm them if he could help it. That night, the palace was quiet, yet the forest outside seemed to hum with anticipation. The northern winds whispered through the towers, carrying warnings and omens alike. Somewhere beyond the trees, unseen eyes watched, aware that the Alpha King's redemption had begun, but that greater trials awaited. Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the bond thrumming like a heartbeat between them. "We have survived so much," she whispered. "But I know more is coming. I will face it," he said firmly. "Whatever comes, I will face it." Together, they stayed like that, wrapped in the quiet warmth of their unity, yet outside, shadows moved and the forest shifted. The child slept peacefully, but the mark on its skin glimmered faintly under the torchlight, a reminder that destiny, while delayed, could not be ignored. And as the moon rose high in the sky, pale and watchful, the Alpha King understood the truth of the healer's words. Protection required more than strength. Love required surrender. And destiny required courage beyond measure. The first light of dawn stretched across the northern forest, brushing the palace towers with pale gold. The world seemed still, as if holding its breath after the storms of the past weeks. Inside the chamber, Lyra lay awake, the child resting quietly against her chest. The Alpha King sat nearby, his dark eyes tracing every rise and fall of her breathing, every soft sigh of their child. The palace had been quiet for a long time, but now there was a sense of life, fragile yet fierce, pulsing in every corner. Their bond, once fractured by pride and distance, now beat strong and steady as the child's small heart in Lyra's arms. Outside, the northern winds whispered through the trees, carrying the secrets of the forest. Somewhere beyond the mountains, shadows moved and creatures watched, waiting for the next chapter of destiny to unfold. But for now, inside the palace, there was warmth. There was hope. Lyra lifted her head and met the Alpha King's gaze. "You stayed," she said softly, awe in her voice. "Even when the world seemed impossible, you stayed."
I could not leave you, he replied, his voice steady but low, almost reverent. Not you.
"Not our child. Not this bond. I finally understand what it means to surrender." Lyra's fingers brushed against his cheek, a touch both gentle and powerful. "Then perhaps," she said, "we can face whatever comes together." The child stirred in her arms, tiny hands reaching out, touching the Alpha King's hand as if recognizing the connection between them. He smiled faintly, warmth flooding through his chest. "We will protect you," he whispered, pressing his lips softly to the child's forehead. "No harm will reach you while I breathe." But even in this fragile peace, the shadows of destiny lingered. The mark on the child's skin glimmered faintly, visible in the early light. It was a mark of power, yes, but also of trials to come. The Alpha King's eyes darkened as he realized the responsibility that now lay upon his shoulders. Protecting them would not be easy. Not from enemies, not from fate, and not from the world itself. That afternoon he walked with Lyra through the palace gardens, the child swaddled safely against her chest. The snow had begun to melt in the sunlight, revealing patches of green grass stubbornly pushing through the white. Winter roses, once frostbitten, had begun to bloom again, delicate and strong. Lyra paused by one, touching its petals lightly. "They survive," she said almost to herself. "Even after the harshest cold, they survive and bloom. Like you," he said quietly, "like you and our child." "Stronger than I ever realized." Lyra smiled faintly, her heart warming at his words. "I could not have done it alone," she admitted. "Nor could our child. But you stayed. That is what matters." Even as they spoke, a ripple passed through the forest beyond the palace walls, subtle but unmistakable. The Alpha King stiffened. The shadows were moving again, and a presence he could feel deep in his bones approached. A test, perhaps, or a challenge, but one he would not shy from. He took Lyra's hand gently, grounding himself, and whispered, "Whatever comes, we face it together." That night the new moon rose high in the sky, pale and serene. Its light bathed the palace in silver, soft and protective. In the great hall the Alpha King called his council not as a ruler distant and feared, but as a man transformed by love, humility, and purpose. He spoke of protection, of unity, of the child's future, and the need to honor both tradition and compassion. The council listened in silence, some skeptical, others surprised, yet all aware of the change in the Alpha King. His aura, once sharp and unyielding, now carried warmth and strength together. Lyra stood by his side, holding the child, her eyes proud and trusting. They had faced fear, loss, and the weight of prophecy, and they had survived, together. Later, in the quiet of the tower, the Alpha King knelt before Lyra and the child. "I failed you once," he said softly, voice low with emotion. "I let pride and duty blind me, but I swear I will never let that happen again. We are one. Always." Lyra smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes.
"And you have learned," she said. "Love is not weakness.
It is strength. And now we are stronger. All of us." Their hands intertwined over the child's small body, and the bond pulsed like a living thread connecting past, present, and future. The Alpha King felt it fully, the responsibility, the joy, the fear, and the hope. He had been given a second chance, and he would not squander it. Days passed, each filled with small victories and growing joy. Lyra regained full strength, the child thrived, and the Alpha King devoted himself to learning the true meaning of family, of connection, and of love that required courage. The palace, once cold and distant, now felt alive, vibrant with warmth and purpose. Yet the mark on the child remained, faint but constant, a reminder that destiny's tests were far from over. The Alpha King knew that trials awaited towers beyond their understanding, challenges from beyond the northern forests, and perhaps forces that would question the bond they had fought so hard to restore. But for the first time, he did not fear. He had learned to surrender, to open his heart, and to stand beside those he loved. That, he realized, was the greatest strength a king, or a man, could possess. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the Alpha King and Lyra walked along the palace walls, the child asleep in her arms. The wind carried the scent of snow and pine, of life enduring against all odds. The Alpha King looked down at his family, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "We are ready," he said softly. "No matter what comes, we are ready." Lyra rested her head against his shoulder. "Together," she whispered. "Always together." And for a long moment, there was only silence. Only the bond between them, stronger and brighter than ever. The palace walls, the forests, even the stars above seemed to hum in approval, as if acknowledging the transformation of a king, a mate, and a child marked for destiny. Outside, the shadows of the forest stirred, watching, waiting. But this time, they did not carry fear. The Alpha King had changed. He had faced his failings, surrendered his pride, and embraced the power of love. The bond was whole, unbreakable, and the child, with its mark shining faintly in the moonlight, would grow with protection, guidance, and a family united. The northern winds carried a soft whisper through the palace towers, words that spoke of challenges yet to come, but also of hope and triumph. The Alpha King, Lyra, and their child stood together, facing the future as one. The moon shone pale and bright, a silent witness to the redemption of a man, the resilience of a woman, and the promise of life that would bloom no matter the storms ahead.